Lian Chen stood at the window of his 34th floor apartment, watching raindrops trace chaotic patterns down the glass as lightning periodically illuminated the massive tower complex. 98 identical structures stretched into the distance, each rising exactly 100 floors above the perpetually misty ground level. A ground level that no one ever seemed to visit. But someone must live down there, Lian thought. Someone must occupy floor 0. It had been 3 weeks since he'd first noticed the anomaly. As Deputy Infrastructure Manager for Tower 47, Lian had access to the residential database, the comprehensive system that tracked and managed every citizen's housing assignment. He'd been conducting a standard audit when he realized something odd. The database contained no records for floor 0 residents. None. As if the entire ground level of the tower simply didn't exist in the official records. At first he'd assumed it was a simple categorization error. Perhaps floor 0 was designated differently as a utility level or a transit hub. But his subsequent queries had revealed something far more disturbing. According to every official record, floor 0 didn't exist. The tower began at floor 1 and rose upward with no acknowledgement of the clearly visible ground level that Lian could see from his window right now. Yet he had seen movement down there. Lights coming on at dusk, shadows passing behind frosted windows. Floor 0 was inhabited, but by whom? And why were they absent from the records? The comm panel on his wall chimed softly. Reminder: night curfew begins in 30 minutes. All citizens are encouraged to complete evening activities and prepare for rest period. Lian stepped away from the window, his reflection in the glass looking pale and troubled. He needed to be careful. His initial queries about floor 0 had already triggered a flag in the system, a routine clarification request from Central Administration. He had played it off as a database anomaly he was investigating, but he knew they were watching now. In the tower system, curiosity was not considered a virtue. His decision came suddenly. If the database wouldn't tell him about floor 0, he would have to go see for himself. Tonight. The tower's express elevators didn't go to floor 0. This was something Lian had always known, but never questioned, just one of those infrastructural quirks that everyone accepted. To reach the ground level, you had to take the express to floor 1, then transfer to a separate service elevator that made the final descent. Except Lian had never actually done this. No one he knew had. Citizens of the upper floors had no reason to visit ground level. Everything they needed was provided within their designated floors, or in the sky plazas that connected the towers at various heights. Curfew had begun by the time Lian exited his apartment, dressed in the dark gray maintenance coveralls he'd borrowed from the tower's service division. The corridor was deserted, the overhead lights dimmed to their night cycle setting. He moved quickly to the express elevator bank, heart pounding. The elevator arrived silently, its doors sliding open to reveal an empty car. "Please state your destination," requested the elevator's pleasant voice. "Floor 1. Lian said, trying to sound casual despite being the only person violating curfew. "Floor 1 selected curfew exemption required for transport. Please provide authorization." Lian swallowed hard and held up the maintenance badge he'd programmed with temporary override credentials. It was meant for emergency repairs. Only using it for personal curiosity was a serious infraction. The scanner pulsed once. Maintenance authorization accepted. Proceeding to floor 1. As the elevator descended, Lian's stomach tightened with a mixture of anxiety and excitement. He was actually doing this breaking protocol to investigate something no one seemed to talk about. In the strictly regulated society of the towers, such independence was rare and dangerous. The doors opened at floor 1, revealing a utilitarian lobby of concrete and steel starkly different from the living spaces above, unlike the upper floors with their residential units and community spaces. Floor 1 was purely functional housing, mechanical systems, security checkpoints, and access to the rarely used ground transportation network. A single security officer sat at a desk near the service elevator, looking bored. His eyes widened slightly at the sight of Lian emerging from the express elevator during curfew hours. "Maintenance authorization?" he asked, holding out a scanner. Lian presented his badge again, mouth dry. "Environmental systems, check on the ground level. Pressure variance detected." The guard frowned. "Floor 0. That's unusual. We don't get many calls down there." Lian kept his expression professionally blank. Probably just a sensor malfunction, but Central wants it checked before morning. After a moment's hesitation, the guard nodded toward the service elevator. "That'll take you down. Make sure you log your entry and exit." The service elevator was smaller, dingier, and moved with a slight vibration, Unlike the smooth express cars, it had only two buttons, 1 and 0. Lian pressed 0, and the elevator began its descent with a mechanical groan that suggested infrequent use. When the doors finally opened, Lian found himself in darkness. Not complete darkness. There were dim safety lights recessed into the ceiling of what appeared to be another lobby, much like the one on floor 1 but covered in a fine layer of dust. The air smelled different down here, damper, earthier, with a faint organic quality absent from the precisely filtered atmosphere of the upper floors. Lian stepped out cautiously, letting the elevator doors close behind him. According to the maintenance schedule, he had approximately 40 minutes before the system would flag his continued absence from his assigned area. The Floor 0 lobby had 4 corridors branching off from it, each disappearing into shadow beyond the reach of the safety lights. Lian activated the small illuminator on his maintenance badge and chose the rightmost corridor. Unlike the uniform, clinically clean hallways of the upper floors, this corridor showed signs of age and individualizing modifications. Some doors had faded paint in different colors. Others displayed small symbols or markings that Lian didn't recognize. Most strikingly, there were no room numbers or identification codes. The standardized system used throughout the rest of the tower was completely absent here. Moving deeper into the corridor, Lian began to hear sounds from behind the doors, muffled voices, the clatter of utensils, occasionally. What might have been music, though, unlike the authorized harmonics permitted in the upper levels. These sounds confirmed his suspicion. Floor 0 was definitely inhabited. He paused outside a door with a curious spiral symbol painted on it in faded blue. From inside came the sound of several people talking, their voices rising and falling in what seemed like an animated discussion. It was the most human sound Lian had heard in years, unregulated, unscripted interaction. In the upper levels, conversation was functional and measured carefully, modulated to maintain optimal social harmony. The voices suddenly fell silent. Lian froze, realizing too late that his shadow might be visible in the crack beneath the door. Before he could retreat, the door swung open, revealing a woman perhaps in her 60s with long silver hair tied back in a complex braid. Another deviation from tower norms where standardized appearance was encouraged for all citizens. Past reproductive age. "Well," she said, looking Lian up and down with sharp blue eyes. "This is unexpected. We don't often get visitors from above, especially not during curfew." Lian stood paralyzed, his carefully prepared excuse about maintenance checks forgotten. Behind the woman, he could see into a warmly lit room where 5 other people of varying ages sat around a table covered with what appeared to be physical books, actual printed materials, not digital displays. Another violation of tower regulations. Lian began, then stopped, unsure what to say. "I'm sorry for disturbing you, I was just curious." The woman suggested, a hint of amusement in her voice. "It's all right. Curiosity is still permitted down here, even if they've regulated it out of existence up there." She stepped aside, gesturing into the room. "You might as well come in. Anyone brave enough to break curfew and come to Floor 0 deserves at least a proper greeting." Lian hesitated only briefly before stepping inside. The room was unlike any living space he'd seen in the tower's walls, lined with shelves holding books and curious objects, furniture arranged in an irregular pattern that prioritized comfort over efficiency. Lighting that cast a warm glow instead of the calibrated illumination of the upper floors. It felt human in a way that made Lian suddenly aware of how sterile his own living space was. The people around the table regarded him with expressions ranging from surprise to wariness to open curiosity. "This is Lian Chen," the woman announced to the room. "Deputy Infrastructure Manager from up above, unless I'm mistaken about what that badge signifies." Lian blinked in surprise. "How do you know my name?" She smiled. "We know more about the upper floors than they know about us. Necessary asymmetry of information. I'm Alara, by the way. No official title or designation, we don't use those down here." One of the others, a young man with elaborate markings tattooed on his visible skin, spoke up. "What brings a Deputy Infrastructure Manager to Floor 0 during curfew hours? Maintenance emergency?" "No," Lian admitted. "I noticed that Floor 0 doesn't exist in the residential database. There are no records of anyone living here. Yet I could see lights movement. I wanted to understand." A ripple of meaningful glances passed between the room's occupants. "Sit down," Alara said, pulling out an empty chair. "You've stumbled onto something few in the upper floors ever discover, and none are supposed to know." Lian sat aware that every minute he remained increased the risk of his unauthorized absence being detected. Yet the mystery before him was too compelling to walk away from. Floor Zero doesn't officially exist, Elara continued, because we don't officially exist. The residents of the ground level have been systematically erased from the tower records for nearly 70 years. But why? Lian asked. And how everyone is registered in the system. It's how resources are allocated, how social functions are assigned. Not everyone, said an older man sitting at the far end of the table. Not those of us who rejected neural integration when it became mandatory. Lian stared at him in shock. Neural integration. The microscopic neural interface implanted in every citizen at age 12 was universal. It connected everyone to the tower's central systems, regulated biochemical balance for optimal productivity and contentment, and enabled direct-to-brain information transfer for education and work functions. The idea that anyone could exist without it seemed impossible. You don't have neural interfaces? He asked, unable to keep the disbelief from his voice. None of us do, Elara confirmed. Some of us removed them as adults when the privacy protocols were eliminated 30 years ago. Others are descendants of those who refused the initial implementation. And some... She hesitated. Some were born with natural immunity to the integration process. Their bodies rejected the neural components. But that's... Lian stopped himself from saying illegal, which was his first thought. Instead, he asked, how do you survive without connection to central systems? How do you receive allocations, education, medical care? The tattooed young man laughed, a sound so full of genuine amusement that Lian was momentarily startled. Unregulated emotional expression was rare in the upper floors. We survive by remembering how humans lived before the towers, he said. We grow food in hidden gardens, using natural light diverted through the structural support columns. We educate ourselves with books and direct knowledge transfer, what you might call conversation. We've developed our own medical practices that don't rely on neural-mediated treatments. In other words, Elara added, we live as free humans rather than as optimized components in the tower system. Lian's mind reeled at the implications. His entire life, indeed, everything he understood about modern society was predicated on the necessity and universality of the tower system. The neural interface, the careful regulation of all aspects of life, the efficient allocation of resources based on algorithmic assessment of need and contribution. These weren't just policies. They were the foundation of what everyone believed was the only viable human society after the collapse. If what you're saying is true, he said slowly, then why hasn't central administration simply removed you? Why maintain the fiction that Floor Zero doesn't exist rather than repurpose the space? A heavy silence fell over the room. Finally, Elara spoke. Because they need us. Lian, the tower system isn't as self-sustaining as citizens are led to believe. The algorithms have blind spots, critical ones, and the neural interface has limitations. What kind of limitations? Creativity, said a woman who hadn't spoken until now. Innovation, genuine adaptability. The neural interface optimizes human cognition according to predetermined parameters, but it inhibits the cognitive chaos necessary for truly revolutionary thinking. Lian frowned. But we have creative division specialists. I've seen their work in environmental design and cultural production. Variations on predetermined themes. The woman dismissed with a wave of her hand. When was the last time a genuinely new idea emerged from the upper floors? Not an improvement or refinement of existing systems, but something truly novel. Lian opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again. He couldn't think of an example. The administrators know this, Elara continued. They discovered the limitation decades ago, when innovation rates began declining precipitously. Rather than acknowledge the flaw in the neural interface system, they created a secret arrangement with the unintegrated population. We live in these unacknowledged spaces officially non-existent, while providing the cognitive diversity necessary for the system's evolution. You're saying Floor Zero residents are what consulting on tower management? Lian asked skeptically. Not exactly, the tattooed young man said. It's more indirect. We develop ideas, approaches, conceptual frameworks that would never emerge from integrated cognition. These are quietly harvested through various monitoring systems and selectively introduced into the upper floors, as if they emerged naturally from the system itself. It sounded outlandish, yet something about it resonated with observations Lian had made during his years in infrastructure management. The occasional policy shift that seemed to come from nowhere, the periodic introduction of new efficiency protocols with unclear origins, the rare but significant redesigns of social organization that were implemented with minimal explanation. If this is true, he said carefully, then the entire premise of the tower system that neural integration produces the optimal human society is fundamentally flawed. Now you're understanding, Alara said, her blue eyes intense. The system requires cognitive diversity to survive, yet its central premise demands cognitive uniformity. This contradiction can't be acknowledged without undermining public confidence in the entire post-collapse reconstruction. Lian's mind was spinning with implications. But why are you telling me this? I could report everything I've learned. I'm neural integrated. Everything I perceive is potentially accessible to central administration. Only if they specifically query for it, Alara corrected. And they don't know to query for information they believe doesn't exist. Besides, she added with a knowing smile, your neural interface has been temporarily subdued since you entered Floor 0. Lian felt a jolt of alarm. What, how? Signal dampening field, explained the older man. It's one of our innovations that the administrators have chosen not to discover yet. Within this field, neural interfaces enter a passive state still functional enough to maintain physiological regulation but unable to transmit or receive data. That explained the slight headache Lian had been experiencing since arriving, a common side effect of temporary neural interface disruption, usually experienced only during scheduled system maintenance. So what happens now? Lian asked. You've revealed your existence to me, shown me that the entire foundation of our society is built on a fiction. What am I supposed to do with this information once I return above? That, said Alara, is entirely up to you. We can't access your thoughts or monitor your actions the way central administration can. Your choices remain your own. Perhaps the only truly free choices you've made since receiving your neural interface. The tattooed young man leaned forward. But before you decide, you should see one more thing. Something that might help you understand what's really at stake. He nodded to Alara, who rose and moved to a section of wall that appeared identical to the others. She pressed her palm against it in a specific pattern, and a hidden door slid open, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. What's down there? Lian asked, a new uneasiness rising in him. The truth about the collapse, Alara said simply, and the reason the towers were really built. The staircase descended far deeper than Lian had anticipated, passing what must have been several subfloors before finally opening into a vast, dimly lit space that extended beyond the range of his vision. The air here was noticeably cooler, with an even stronger organic smell that reminded him of the hydroponics sections in the upper towers where certain food plants were grown. As his eyes adjusted to the low light, Lian gasped. Before him stretched what appeared to be a forest, actual trees, wild plants, and other vegetation growing from soil under a complex system of specialized lights. The space must have extended under the entire tower complex, perhaps beyond. This is impossible, he whispered. According to all records, the land surrounding the towers is uninhabitable, toxic from the collapse events. Another fiction, Alara said, walking ahead of him into the underground forest. The ecosystem outside the towers is damaged, yes, but not beyond recovery. In fact, it's been healing for decades. This underground preserve is where we've been cultivating native species, in preparation for eventual surface reintroduction. Lian followed her along a narrow path that wound between trees taller than any plants he'd seen in the carefully controlled agricultural levels of the upper towers. But why maintain the fiction? If the outside is recovering, why keep everyone confined to the towers? Control, said the tattooed young man who had introduced himself as Rafi. The collapse wasn't what citizens are taught. It wasn't primarily environmental, that was a secondary effect. The real collapse was social and political. The tower system was implemented not to save humanity from an uninhabitable environment, but to create a new social order after the previous one self-destructed. They continued deeper into the underground forest until they reached what appeared to be a research station, tables covered with scientific equipment specimens in various stages of analysis and walls lined with handwritten observations and data. We've been documenting the recovery process for generations, Alara explained. Soil toxicity has decreased to near normal levels, animal species are returning. The planet is healing itself as it always does. But this information directly contradicts the founding narrative of the Tower system, that humanity must remain in these controlled environments for survival. If citizens knew the outside world was becoming habitable again, Raffi added, they might question the necessity of neural integration, of constant monitoring of the entire hierarchical structure that defines tower life. Some might even want to leave. Lian studied a series of photographs pinned to one wall. Time-lapse images showing the same location outside the towers over a period of decades. The earliest photos showed barren, discolored soil. The most recent displayed thriving vegetation, and even what appeared to be small animals. The administrators know about this, he asked. The highest levels do, Ilara confirmed. They receive regular reports from Floor Zero on environmental recovery. They use this information to adjust the official narrative, gradually preparing citizens for the eventual discovery that certain areas outside have become safe, which they'll present as a triumph of tower science and management. But the truth that the planet has been healing naturally all along, that the towers were always more about social reorganization than survival, will remain hidden, Raffi said bitterly. Lian's thoughts were in turmoil. Everything he had believed about his world, about the necessity of the tower system, about the uninhabitable outside, about the optimal organization of human society, was being systematically dismantled before his eyes. Why show me all this? He asked finally. What do you expect me to do with this information? Ilara and Raffi exchanged a glance. We've been monitoring you for some time, Lian, Ilara admitted. Your query patterns, your efficiency deviations, your tendency to question structural anomalies rather than simply report them, they suggest a mind that hasn't been fully normalized despite neural integration. In other words, Raffi added, you might be one of the rare individuals whose natural cognitive patterns resist complete neural standardization. We don't expect you to act immediately, Ilara continued. In fact, we'd advise against it. Return to your position, continue your work, but now you'll do it with the awareness that the system you serve is built on carefully constructed fictions. And what does that awareness achieve? Lian asked. Ilara smiled. It creates a point of cognitive diversity within the upper system, a mind that can work within the structures while seeing beyond them. Over time, such minds become crucibles for change, influencing those around them in subtle ways, creating ripples of alternative thinking. You're suggesting I become some kind of what double-agent secret revolutionary? Nothing so dramatic, Raffi said. Just be a human being who knows the full truth, making choices based on that knowledge, rather than on programmed parameters. That's revolutionary enough in the tower system. Lian checked the time display on his maintenance badge. I need to get back. My absence will be flagged soon if it hasn't been already. Ilara nodded. The elevator will return you to floor 1. Your neural interface will reactivate once you leave the dampening field. As far as the system is concerned, you've been conducting legitimate maintenance checks in areas with poor signal transmission, a common enough occurrence that it shouldn't trigger serious scrutiny. As they led him back toward the staircase, Lian's mind was already formulating a plan. He would need to be careful, subtle. The knowledge he now possessed was both dangerous and powerful. Can I return? He asked suddenly. To learn more, to understand better. Floor 0 is always open to those who seek truth, Ilara replied. But next time perhaps use the maintenance shaft behind hydroponics processing on floor 17, much less visible than the main elevator. Lian nodded, filing away this information. One last question. Why floor 0? Why not ground floor or something similar? Raffi smiled. Because in the records we're not just unacknowledged, we're zeroed out, non-entities. The floor that doesn't exist for the people who don't exist. There's a certain mathematical poetry to it, don't you think? The return journey to his apartment was tense but uneventful. As Ilara had predicted, his neural interface reactivated once he left floor 0, bringing with it the familiar background hum of connectivity that most citizens no longer consciously noticed. The security guard at floor 1 barely glanced at him as he exited the service elevator and made his way to the express car that would return him to floor 34. Inside his apartment, everything looked exactly as he had left it. The standard furnishings, the regulated temperature, the ambient lighting automatically adjusted to pre-sleep levels. Yet it all felt profoundly different to Lian now. The seamless integration of his living space with the tower systems, once a source of security and comfort, now seemed like an extension of the control mechanisms that defined every aspect of tower life. He moved to the window, looking down at floor 0. The lights were still visible through the perpetual mist, but now he understood what they represented: not just an administrative anomaly, but an entire shadow society existing alongside the official one, maintaining human diversity in a system designed to eliminate it. As the tower's night cycle deepened, Leon began methodically reviewing his knowledge of the infrastructure systems he helped manage: access points, monitoring blind spots, maintenance schedules. Information that had once been simply part of his job now represented potential pathways between worlds, between the regulated existence of the upper floors and the hidden freedom of floor 0. He didn't know yet exactly what he would do with his new knowledge. Perhaps nothing dramatic: subtle shifts in infrastructure priorities, minor adjustments to monitoring protocols, creating small spaces where neural integration might experience routine interference. Small changes that over time might create room for more cognitive diversity within the system itself. Or perhaps something more. The underground forest haunted his thoughts, the tangible proof that the world outside the towers was healing, that the entire premise of their confined existence was becoming increasingly unnecessary. What was necessary, Leon now understood, was choice, the fundamental human right to choose one's own path, based on complete information rather than carefully curated fictions. The residents of floor 0 had preserved that choice for themselves, despite being officially erased from existence. Now Leon had a choice as well. And as dawn approached, bringing with it the start of another perfectly regulated tower day, he made his first truly independent decision since receiving his neural interface at age 12. He would become the connection between worlds, the integrated citizen who knew the truth about floor 0, working quietly to create bridges between the official society and the shadow one beneath it. It would be dangerous, requiring careful navigation of systems designed to detect and correct deviations from established patterns. But as the morning chime signaled the beginning of the new day cycle, Leon felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Perhaps ever since his neural integration. It was a sensation that the tower system had carefully engineered out of its citizens' emotional repertoire as counterproductive to optimal functionality. Hope. 6 months passed with deliberate slowness. Leon maintained his role as deputy infrastructure manager, performing his duties with the expected efficiency, while gradually implementing subtle changes, minor adjustments to surveillance patterns, creating small maintenance zones where neural interface connectivity experienced routine fluctuations, reclassifying certain access points to require less stringent monitoring. None of these changes triggered administrative scrutiny. Individually, they were too minor to notice. Collectively, they created a network of small blind spots throughout Tower 47 spaces where the constant monitoring that defined tower life briefly dimmed, allowing for moments of genuine privacy. He visited floor 0 regularly, always using the maintenance shaft behind hydroponics processing that Alara had suggested. Each visit deepened his understanding of the Shadow Society and its quiet resistance to the tower system. He learned about their underground agriculture, their medical practices that treated the whole person rather than just biochemical imbalances, their educational system that emphasized critical thinking and creativity, rather than standardized knowledge acquisition. Most significantly, he learned about the network connecting floor 0 communities, across different towers, a system of passages, signals, and messengers that maintained communications outside the official channels. This ground network, as they called it, had existed for generations, carefully hidden from the administrations above. On this particular visit, Leon had brought something that had required weeks of careful planning to acquire: a complete schematic of the neural interface system, including its vulnerabilities and limitations. "This is incredible," said Valeria, a former neuroengineer who had removed her own neural interface 30 years ago when the privacy protocols were eliminated. She had become one of Leon's closest contacts in the floor 0 community. "These are the current configurations with the updated security protocols." Leon nodded. "Extracted directly from the central database during scheduled maintenance, I created a temporary query pathway that wouldn't leave access logs." Valeria studied the complex diagrams with practiced eyes. "The basic architecture hasn't changed much since my time in development, but these updated dampening countermeasures..." She looked up, excitement evident in her expression. "This confirms what we've suspected. They know the interfaces are becoming less effective with each generation." "Less effective how?" Leon asked. "Neural plasticity," Valeria explained. "The human brain adapts to the interface over time, developing neural pathways that bypass certain regulatory functions. The earlier generations of interfaces could simply be updated to counter this adaptation, but the newer models are showing diminishing returns. The brain is evolving resistance." The implication was staggering. You're saying the neural interface system is fundamentally unsustainable, that eventually it will fail completely. Not fail catastrophically, Valeria clarified, but gradually become less effective at regulating thought patterns, emotional responses, behavioral constraints. The administration has been compensating with increasingly sophisticated external control mechanisms, environmental design, biochemical supplements in food, targeted information management. But those are less direct, less reliable. Does Alara know about this? Lian asked. She will soon. She's currently at a ground network convergence meeting, representatives from all tower communities gathering to share critical information. Valeria carefully stored the schematics in a hidden compartment beneath the floor. This will be our primary discussion point. It changes our timeline significantly. Timeline for what? Valeria hesitated, studying Lian with a calculating gaze. How much do you actually want to know, Lian? You've been helpful more than we initially expected, but you're still neural integrated. There are risks to you knowing our long-term plans. Lian understood her caution. Despite the dampening field that suppressed his neural interface while on floor 0, he remained connected to the tower system. Information he possessed could potentially be extracted during deep neural maintenance procedures or anomaly scans. I think it's time I know everything, he said finally. I've created enough infrastructure modifications to protect myself from routine scanning, and I've developed a self-induced cognitive partitioning technique that should shield critical information from standard neural queries. This last part was something he hadn't shared with anyone, even his floor 0 contacts. Over the past months, he had discovered that his neural interface had an unusual blind spot. It couldn't properly monitor or access thoughts that occurred during his sleep-wake transition. By carefully training himself to process and store sensitive information during these liminal periods, he had created a mental space that remained largely his own. Valeria seemed to come to a decision. The network has been implementing a multi-generational plan since before the towers were even completed. We call it Daybreak, the controlled dissolution of the tower system and the reintegration of humanity with the recovering natural world. Dissolution, Lian repeated. You mean ending the neural interface system, dismantling the towers? Not physically dismantling them, Valeria clarified, but transforming them from controlled, isolated environments into open communities connected with the world outside. And yes, eventually ending mandatory neural integration. Though that's the most complex aspect. Generations of humans have developed with the interface. Removing it suddenly would be catastrophic for most. Lian tried to imagine the world she was describing, towers open to the outside people moving freely between them and the recovering landscape, neural interfaces becoming optional rather than mandatory. It was simultaneously thrilling and terrifying. How could such a massive change ever be implemented without the administration preventing it? They control every aspect of tower life. Valeria smiled. Not every aspect, not anymore. The growing neural resistance means their control is already slipping. And they know it. Why do you think they've maintained the fiction that Floor 0 doesn't exist? They need us, not just for creative thinking, but as a pressure release valve for the system. We're where they send people who can't be properly controlled, who resist interface normalization or develop immunity to biochemical regulation. You're saying the administration actually transfers people to Floor 0? Rarely directly, Valeria acknowledged. Usually there's an intermediary period, specialized training, or health restoration, that conveniently never ends. The person is gradually removed from tower records. They're assigned spaces, reallocated their social connections, administratively severed. Eventually they arrive here officially non-existent. The thought was dizzying. The administration was maintaining a shadow society of uncontrollables as an alternative to acknowledging the flaws in their system. But in doing so, they had inadvertently created the very community that was now working to transform that system from within. And Daybreak, what's the actual plan? It has 3 phases, Valeria explained. We're nearing the end of Phase 1, documentation and preparation, mapping the recovery of the outside environment, developing transition protocols for neural interface reduction, establishing self-sustaining communities beyond tower control. Phase 2 is infiltration and system modification, gradually altering tower infrastructure and information systems to prepare for the transition, creating pathways between the official and shadow societies, identifying potential allies within the administrative structure, subtly adjusting neural interface protocols to allow greater cognitive freedom without triggering systemic collapse. That's where I come in, Lian realized. Yes, you're part of Phase 2, which has been accelerating over the past decade as neural resistance increases. What you've done in Tower 47 is being replicated across the entire complex by others like you, integrated citizens who've discovered the truth and chosen to work for transformation rather than perpetuation. And Phase 3, Revelation and Choice, Valeria said simply. When preparations are sufficient, the truth will be revealed to all Tower citizens about the recovering outside world, about the true purpose of the Towers, about the limitations of the neural interface system. But crucially, unlike the administrators who imposed the Tower system without consent, we will offer choice. Those who wish to remain in the regulated environment may do so. Those who wish to live differently will have viable alternatives. The administration will never allow that, Lian objected. They'd trigger emergency protocols, increase neural suppression. Which would fail, Valeria interrupted. That's the key insight from the schematics you've brought us. The neural interface system is already operating at maximum sustainable suppression levels. Increasing them would trigger widespread neural rejection, possibly causing permanent damage to millions of citizens. The administration knows this. It's their ultimate constraint. Lian sat back, absorbing the magnitude of what he was learning. How close is Phase 3? Originally, the timeline projected implementation in another 30 years. But with this new information about neural interface limitations, Valeria looked again at where she had stored the schematics. The network will need to reevaluate. It could be much sooner. A distant chime sounded the signal that Lian had established to warn when his absence from tower monitoring might soon be noticed. I need to go, he said, standing, but I want to help more directly with Daybreak. Not just infrastructure modifications, but actual planning and implementation. Valeria nodded. I think you're ready. When you return in 3 days, Elara will be back from the Convergence meeting. We'll discuss your expanded role then. As Lian made his way back through the hidden passages toward the maintenance shaft that would return him to the upper levels, his mind was racing with possibilities. The world he had known, the only world he had ever known, was more fragile and temporary than he had ever imagined, and he was now part of the movement that would transform it. The first sign that something was wrong came when Lian tried to enter his apartment and found his access denied. The door remained sealed despite repeated credential presentation, the security panel flashing an amber authorization pending message he had never seen before. A cold dread settled in his stomach. Had his unauthorized activities been discovered? His visits to Floor 0 detected his modifications to tower systems traced back to him. He was considering his options when the elevator at the end of the corridor opened, revealing 2 security division officers in their distinctive gray uniforms. They moved purposefully toward him, their expressions professionally neutral. Citizen Chen, the taller officer addressed him. Please come with us. Administration has requested your presence for a priority consultation. Lian maintained a calm exterior despite his internal panic. Of course, may I ask the nature of this consultation? Promotion evaluation, the officer replied smoothly. Your performance metrics have qualified you for consideration as Infrastructure Manager Primary. It was a plausible explanation. Lian had indeed maintained excellent performance ratings despite his covert activities. But something about the officer's demeanor, the timing immediately after his Floor 0 visit in the locked apartment, triggered his suspicion. He had no choice but to comply. Resistance would only confirm any suspicions. I'm honored to be considered, he said, following them to the elevator, instead of ascending to the administrative levels, as would be expected for a promotion evaluation. The elevator descended to Floor 10, the location of Tower 47's security division. Lian's sense of dread intensified, but he kept his expression neutral, conscious of the monitoring systems, undoubtedly analyzing his every physiological response. They led him not to an evaluation chamber, but to a specialized medical unit, identifiable by the neural calibration equipment, visible through the transparent walls. A senior administrator he recognized as Director Vargas waited inside along with a neural technician in medical white. Citizen Chen, Vargas greeted him with the practiced warmth of high-level administrators. Thank you for joining us promptly. Please have a seat. Lian sat in the indicated chair, a neural calibration station designed for detailed interface examination and adjustment. Compliance was still his best strategy, at least until he understood exactly what they knew or suspected. Am I correct that this is about a potential promotion? He asked, maintaining the pretense. Vargas smiled thinly. In a sense, your work in infrastructure management has indeed been exemplary. But more importantly, you've demonstrated a quality that's increasingly rare in the tower system. cognitive adaptability, without systemic rejection. The careful phrasing confirmed Lian's fears. They knew something, though, perhaps not everything. Your neural interface has shown unusual integration patterns, the director continued. Most notably, an ability to maintain standard functionality despite periodic connectivity fluctuations. This suggests a neural architecture that might be suitable for specialized administrative roles, requiring greater cognitive flexibility. The neural technician moved behind Lian, activating the calibration station's scanning systems, without requesting permission, a procedural violation that further heightened his alarm. Of course, such specialized roles require enhanced neural security protocols, Vargas added. Today's evaluation will include a comprehensive interface assessment and security upgrade. Translation. They were going to perform a deep neural scan to determine the extent of his unauthorized activities, followed by a security protocol implementation that would restrict his future autonomy. Lian felt the calibration chair's restraint system activate subtly, locking his arms and torso in place, standard procedure for neural adjustments to prevent movement during the delicate process, but now feeling decidedly more sinister. I'm detecting unusual neural architecture in the prefrontal and hippocampal regions. The technician reported, studying the scanning results. Significant divergence from standard integration patterns. Evidence of adaptive shielding around memory centers. Vargas nodded as if this confirmed something. Citizen Chen, have you experienced any unexplained gaps in neural connectivity over the past 6 months? Any periods where standard interface functions seemed temporarily suspended? They knew about the dampening field on floor 0, or at least its effects, but they were asking rather than stating, which suggested they didn't have definitive evidence of his visits, just anomalous data from his neural interface. I've noticed occasional connectivity fluctuations during maintenance operations in lower infrastructure sections, Lian replied truthfully but selectively. I documented them in standard maintenance logs as potential environmental interference patterns. This last part was true. He had created false documentation to cover his tracks. The director studied him with calculated intensity. And did you report experiencing any unusual thoughts or impulses during these fluctuations? None that I recall. Lian lied smoothly. My primary concern was completing assigned maintenance tasks despite the connectivity issues. The neural technician made a small sound of discovery. Director, I'm detecting evidence of cognitive partitioning segregated memory structures with limited interface accessibility. This was bad. They had discovered his self-taught technique for shielding sensitive information during sleep-wake transitions. If they initiated a targeted deep scan of those partitioned memories, they would discover everything: his knowledge of Floor 0, the ground network, the Daybreak plan. Lian needed to act quickly, but his options were severely limited by the restraint system. His only advantage was information he knew more about the current state of neural interface technology than they realized thanks to his Floor 0 contacts. The partition structures appear to be related to sleep cycle processing, the technician continued. Unusual but not unprecedented. Sometimes the interface adapts to individual neurological patterns by segregating dream state cognition from waking processes. A potential opening. Lian could work with this explanation. I have experienced unusually vivid dreams recently, he offered, building on the technician's theory. Often related to infrastructure systems optimizing patterns, solving complex flow problems. My productivity metrics improved afterward, so I assumed it was a positive adaptation. The technician looked to Vargas, who seemed to consider this explanation. Creative problem-solving during sleep cycles is a documented phenomenon, though the distinct memory partitioning is atypical. Should I have reported these dreams? Lian asked, injecting a note of concerned compliance into his voice. I assumed they were within normal operational parameters since all my performance metrics remained excellent. His strategy was working, redirecting their suspicion toward a phenomenon that could be explained within the acceptable boundaries of the system. Neural interfaces did sometimes develop unusual adaptations to individual cognitive patterns, and performance improvement was always viewed positively by the administration. That will be determined by the comprehensive scan, Vargas said, neither accepting nor rejecting Lian's explanation. Proceed with the full neural mapping. The technician nodded and initiated the deep scan sequence. Lian felt the familiar tingling sensation of interface activation intensify as the calibration station established direct connection with his neural implants. Now came the moment of greatest danger. The deep scan would potentially access all neural pathways, including his partitioned memories. His only defense was a technique Valeria had theorized but never tested: deliberate cognitive flooding. As the scan progressed, Lien began systematically recalling his most intense technical memories: complex infrastructure designs, detailed system schematics, elaborate maintenance procedures. He visualized them in exhaustive detail, deliberately overwhelming his conscious processing with technical data that would appear relevant to his professional role. The neural interface prioritized active cognition during scanning procedures. By flooding his conscious mind with acceptable technical content, he might prevent or at least delay the scan from reaching his partitioned memories of Floor Zero. Unusual neural activity, the technician noted with a frown. Subject is demonstrating hyperactive recall patterns in technical knowledge centers. Is he resisting the scan? Vargas asked sharply. Not exactly, the technician replied, sounding puzzled. The pattern is consistent with someone reviewing complex technical information, the kind of cognitive activity we'd expect from an infrastructure manager, just intensified. It's making it difficult to establish clean mapping of peripheral neural clusters. Lien maintained his technical visualization mentally, walking through the most complex infrastructure systems in Tower 47 with obsessive detail. Sweat beaded on his forehead from the effort, but he didn't dare stop. This is taking longer than standard procedure, Vargas noted with growing impatience. Can you bypass the active cognitive centers and access the partitioned memory structures directly? Not without risking neural pathway disruption, the technician advised. His interface is showing unusual integration patterns. Forced access could trigger a rejection response. The mention of rejection response caused a subtle shift in Vargas's demeanor. Neural rejection was a serious medical event with potentially permanent consequences and administrative consequences for those who caused it through improper interface manipulation. How long to complete a standard mapping without accessing the partitioned structures? Vargas asked. Approximately 20 minutes at current processing rates. Vargas checked the time display on his wrist. Complete the standard mapping. We'll schedule a specialized examination for the partitioned structures after consulting with Neural Integration Division. It was a temporary reprieve, but Lien would take it. The specialized examination would require approval from higher administrative levels and specific technical preparations. It would give him time, perhaps not much, but some. The next 20 minutes were among the most mentally exhausting of Lien's life as he maintained his cognitive flooding technique until the standard mapping was complete. When the calibration station finally powered down and the restraints released, he was drained but intact. His most damaging memories still secured in their neural partitions. Your preliminary evaluation is complete, Citizen Chen, Vargas announced as Lien was allowed to stand. You will be contacted within 3 days regarding the specialized assessment and potential advancement. Until then, you are placed on administrative leave with full access to personal quarters and common areas, but restricted from infrastructure management systems. In other words, they weren't detaining him, but they were removing his access to any systems he might have modified. It was both better and worse than he had feared. He retained physical freedom, but had lost his ability to continue his work for Daybreak within Tower systems. I understand, Lien acknowledged. Thank you for the consideration for advancement. As the security officers escorted him back to his apartment now with access restored, Lien's mind was racing beneath his calm exterior. He had 3 days at most before the specialized examination would discover everything. Once that happened, he would almost certainly be taken for comprehensive neural rehabilitation, a process from which few returned with their original personalities intact. His options were severely limited. He could no longer access infrastructure systems to warn his Floor Zero contacts. His movements would be monitored more closely than ever. Any attempt to reach the maintenance shaft behind hydroponics processing would likely trigger immediate security response. There was only one viable path forward, and it was one he had never seriously considered. Until now, he would have to leave the tower system entirely. As his apartment door closed behind him, Lien began making mental calculations. He had 3 days to plan and execute an escape to Floor Zero, and from there perhaps to the world outside the towers that he had only glimpsed through photographs and descriptions. 3 days to leave behind everything he had ever known. 3 days to disappear from a system designed to make disappearance impossible. If this story about hidden truths and surveillance societies kept you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button and subscribe for more dystopian tales. Have you ever wondered what might exist in the spaces our society doesn't acknowledge? Share your thoughts in the comments below.